got it. Sorry.
That's okay. Minute and a half?
Sure.
So I understand you're in traffic.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
Did you have your space helmet on?
Not on, but like
Sitting shotgun?
sitting shotgun and safely strapped. It's funny.
Come on in.
Come on in. You're in the
Bring
right.
friends.
You're in the right place. You want to be in
3
this
hot dogs.
room.
Hit it with food.
This is true.
T-shirts and food, it gets them every time.
Right?
Yes. Stickers are another good one.
Root beer.
Yeah.
Okay, beer.
Especially for the
Yes.
kids.
Yeah.
All the root beer you can drink.
That's great.
All right, well, what the heck?
Yes.
All right.
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody, so much for joining us this morning. My name is Kat, and I'm here with also Liam. And I have the pleasure of moderating this panel with the lovely one and only Butch Patrick. Yes.
Thank you, Kat.
Oh, yes.
And you know, she drove like a maniac to get here on time, so let's give her a nice round of applause for not killing any pedestrians and causing any harm.
Today.
Just today. Anyway, yes, I'd like to thank everybody for coming out to Planet Funk. It's a funky place to be.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you all have seen the Munsters in the past, whether it be a rerun or a first run. I don't think any of you are old enough to catch it the first time around. Thank God for Nostalgia TV and Beat
I
TV
definitely
and
have.
Antenna TV and all the other channels that seem to flourish with the old TV shows. And the reason they're so popular is because making those old comedies is kind of like a lost art. They just don't do it the way they used to do it. And it's funny, a lot of people ask me, well, why can't they make shows like that anymore? Well, if you think about it, it's just, TV is a reflection of society. You know, basically whenever you're at that time, that's how the shows are. Ozzie and Harriet, 50s, Munsters in the 60s, Charlie's Angels. Everything was period piece reflection of where society was at. So where we're at today is a long way away from the 60s, so you're not going to see a lot of old 60s shows. So anyway, on that note, I did a lot of other work other than the Munsters. I started working in 1961 on a series called General Hospital. First year it was on the air. And as a 7-year-old kid, they say, well, what were you doing? It's like, well, I wasn't a doctor, I was Dr. Hardy's girlfriend and son. They used to always have little kids set up scenes where you would come in, Dr. Hardy had taken me to a baseball game and I carried a pen and a baseball and I said, So, but it was good training because it was the closest thing to theater that I ever did, which was live broadcasting. At 2:30 in the afternoon, they literally went out live, and when you look at some of the old shows and reruns, you'll see a lot of funny bloopers from soaps because they never stopped rolling. And then I went over to a series called The Real McCoys, which was it was on one network, and then they resurrected it on another network without the whole cast. And when I was on, it was just Amos, Walter Brennan, Richard Crenna, and Pepina. And they needed a love interest for Lou, who was Richard Crenna, so they had a widow buy a farm next door or inherit a farm next door. And I was the 9-year-old little boy who rode over on his pony all the time. But that was a good series because we got a chance to work with some really quality people. The Munsters came along as my third series in 64, 65, and 66. And even though I did a couple hundred credits across 10 years, the Munsters is what most people remember me by. And that's fine because it's a great show to be remembered for. We have a lot of fans coming out, children and kids and grandparents and great-grandparents. Something they can all watch together. And that's probably the best thing about the Munsters, is it shows that Universal Studio was the monster studio. The producers had done Leave It to Beaver for 6 years, so they were very good at the fun family, kid-father interaction situation, and they mixed it all up with Monsters, and they came up with a series called The Munsters, which, as we all know, is pretty popular and still has some staying power.
Okay, I have a question.
Thank you.
Actually, more of like a demand. So let's go, before you even started acting, how did you get your start as a child actor?
When I was 7 years old, 2nd grade, my little sister, a guy in town wanted to be mayor, and he thought that getting my adopted dad's endorsement would be good because he was like an influential guy around town. So they thought a good way to get that would be to bring my little sister along for a photo shoot, to put her into some print modeling. And she was like 2 years old, 3 years old. And I was 7, and I went along for the ride to the shoot. The photographer was a pretty famous photographer at the time named Amos Carr, who had a studio on Hollywood Boulevard. And what he did is at the end of it, he looked over at me and he goes, you know, he's got an interesting look. I'd like to take a couple pictures of him, do you mind, just for my own, you know, my own portfolio. And my mom agreed, and he took this picture and he put it in the window. And it was kind of like a goofy shot with this funny hat. And a producer and a director who happened to be casting a little B movie needed a kid, no experience necessary, which I had that all over me. And I got the part, and it happened to be a 6-week shoot with Eddie Albert, Jane Wyatt, Brenda Lee, and Subi Sales, and all these great people. Nancy Cole, you know, who played Miss Hathaway on the Beverly Hillbillies. Everybody remembers Subi Sales, though not everybody was. But it was good, and it was called The Two Little Bears, and I got the part, and he gave me credits. And then during that shoot, I got a Kellogg's Cornflakes commercial, and I got the series General Hospital. So at the end of 6 weeks, I was basically a semi-seasoned veteran. That's how I got started, totally accidentally.
Did you say you were in a cornflakes commercial?
Yeah, Kellogg's Cornflakes commercial. A real good one, too. It wasn't like the best commercial of the year. I played a little kid that was like trying to read the cereal box at breakfast and was having trouble pronouncing the words. And yeah, it's cool.
That's awesome. Okay, I have a question. So, did your sister get any?
No, she didn't really like the idea of acting because she didn't take direction very well. She, even at a young age, she was very, no, I don't want to do that. So she never did. I mean, as a teenager, she did a few parts in 8 is Enough and a couple of little movies with Mark McClure, I think Jimmy Olsen from the Superman movies. But no, I pretty much became the actor of the family. And, you know, I just did it from the time I was 7 to 21. Temporary job. I wanted to make enough money to buy a race car, and I wanted to be a race car driver. So that never happened. And because the Munsters stuck around so long, when I turned 30, we did a thing for MTV. We made a rock video called Whatever Happened to Eddie.
Yes.
And it became the first unsigned video ever to be on MTV when rock, pale and rock music was very much normal. And so I was real proud of that, because what happened was there was a lot of people making videos that didn't have record deals, and the basement tapes on MTV was formed from that Whatever Happened to Eddie concept. So I'd like to think I got a few people some exposure, and maybe got a few record deals for some folks that maybe not otherwise got them. But
Trailblazer, no big deal.
People always ask me, you know, did your music career? I go, I never really had a music career. I did a T-bop music when I was 18, right after I did a Saturday morning series called Lidsville for Sid Morningstar that I starred in. And from that series at the time, David Cassidy, Donny Osmond, Michael Jackson, there was a bunch of teeny bop stuff going on in these teen magazines. And this producer had a group called Sugarloaf, and they were pretty well known, and you know, Green Eyed Lady and Don't Call Us, We'll Call You. And he wanted to do, when Bobby Sherman got fired by Metro Media Records, he wanted to replace that slot with me. But I told him I don't sing, which I don't. But nevertheless, a month later, I'm on American Bandstand. Sugarloaf is my backup band in the recording studio, and we're off to chase David Cassidy around the country to see what makes him so successful. Well, talent is what makes him so successful, and talent I don't have in the music industry. So we put Metro Media out of the record business in less than a year. But
you gave it a go.
The funny part was, everybody should be a rock star for a year and spend a bunch of money. And it was really a good experience. It was kind of like a Cameron Crowe movie, you know, Almost Famous. And then after that, what we did is in 1982 with MTV, we did Whatever Happened to Eddie. I wrote the lyrics. My producer actually played the bass, and my guitar player actually sang, even though I was lip syncing and doing it. So I like to say I was the original Munster Manilli long before Billy Manilli was taking it. And I was taking it double, bass and singing. But I did write the lyrics, so that's my experience in the music industry. For having no talent, I had 5 records. Not bad.
That's great.
At this point, I'm going to turn over the floor. If anybody has any questions out there, yes, young lady.
So I've heard from other panels that have had kid actors, and they're talking about their relationship with their TV families. Can you talk about your relationship with your TV family on the Munsters?
I had a very interesting situation because it's actually very close to home here. When I was in the 5th grade, my mom married another gentleman who was a baseball player. And right after, he was an Angel, LA Angels, and right after they got married, he got traded to the Washington Senators. So my mom and my 2 little infant brothers at that time went to Washington, D.C. to live with him, with my sister. I was left with my grandma who lived in Geneseo. So I was living up the street. And during that stint in Geneseo, Mary Grady, my agent, called and said they're casting, they're unhappy with this kid they cast in this series called the Munsters. They requested you and Yvonne DiCarlo would Butch me up to flying out to LA for a screen test. And my mom said, well, my mom wasn't a pushy stage mom, but she was always an opportunist. So she says, well, sure, you know, we're in the East Coast, but if it happens, he can live with his Uncle Woody, and we'll figure out transportation, because, you know, when you're 11 years old, you're not driving to work, there's not Uber. So anyway, what happened was they flew me out and I got the part. So I started living with my uncle, but to answer your question, my TV family literally became my family. Because I was with them all the time, and we hired one to take me to work. Once a month I would fly to DC to go visit my mom and my stepdad, which I enjoyed because he was a pro ball player. Sure. So you got to go to the ballpark and do all kinds of great stuff. So I had a very blessed life. When I was 10, 11, 12, when kids are really, you know, premium years in your life, I was either at the ballpark or I was at Universal Studios. I loved living with my uncle because he lived on a ranch, so I had a really good time coming and going. And back then in the 60s, you know, Stingray bikes and slot cars, and going to George Barris's shop and seeing the Munster coach and seeing Elvis and all these very cool people picking up their cars. I had a very good childhood, unlike a lot of the horror stories that you've heard from other people. There were some good stories as well. There's a lot of good stuff that came out of the business, not as well as the bad stuff usually kind of gets exaggerated a little bit and exploited somewhat.
Right. It's made me think of it because I saw this panel with the kids from the Waltons, and they had such an idyllic, really situation with that because the Waltons was.
The Waltons?
You know, yeah, the Waltons.
Yeah, John Wellesley is a pretty good friend. John and I always got along really well. I'm working with a gentleman right now that works with Judy Norton-Taylor all the time. So yeah, the Waltons was a very unique situation. That was a very wholesome show in itself, and it had a big cast, and they all seemed to get along really great, which is nice to hear.
Yeah.
Any questions? No.
Yeah, I got one. You probably asked us a lot. What was your favorite episode of the month?
There's several, and the ones that I seem to enjoy the most, I enjoy the one Zombo comes to mind, because the irony of me being on a TV show and watching a TV thing like Marlene at Midnight as a host, or Zombo was the host. So watching that was funny, and Louis Nye was just hilarious. I mean, I remember Miss Sonny Drysdale, you know, the 35-year-old college boy. But that's one. Two is Hot Rod Herman when they introduced the Dragula, because we were in a drag strip and I loved racing cars. And the Munster coach was a huge hit, so to create another car for the show, George Barris did a wonderful job. Eddie's nickname, where I wanted to grow and all I grew was a beard, because it just looks funny with a 10-year-old kid having a full beard. Right. I mean, and then Dr. Dudley, Paul Lynn, was in the episode, and he was so funny. But we were very lucky. There's a lot of good episodes. I mean, Herman, the father and son episodes where I would volunteer Dad to do something and he would never want to disappoint his little boy. Those come to mind because we had this really good interaction, him being 7 foot tall, me being 3.5 feet tall. And me, sometimes they would write it to where he was more childlike than me and I was more adult-like, so like the student became the teacher and back and forth. And it played well. And he was very agile in those shoes, so whenever he was a wrestler or a baseball player or the Bronco rider or the golfer, you know, those were funny bits because he was just so damn big doing these things that it just made for funny gags, and side gags. But Grandpa was good too. I enjoyed the episodes with Grandpa in the dungeon. The dungeon was my favorite set. I mean, when people would come visit me, they would all want to see the dungeon right off the bat. So, there's quite a few of them. And we have for sale a table if you don't have it on home. You can buy the box DVD set, you don't have to go to Walmart. Yes, ma'am.
Did you do voice acting in the Phantom Toll Booth? Were you in the Phantom Toll Booth?
Oh, Phantom Toll Booth. You know, in my brief 12-year career, there's 4 or 5 things that jump out at me that when I look down the list of things that I did that I'm really proud of. And the Phantom Toll Booth is one of them. Chuck Jones you know, master animator, just credits, you know, down up the yin yang, and he did one animated movie in his career, and it was The Phantom Tollbooth. And it's a great book. It's mandatory reading in a lot of 5th grade, 6th grade classrooms. And when I did that movie, I really wanted to do that movie. I fought very hard to get that. It was between me and another kid that I knew well, but I wound up winning it, so it was like, you know, that was a good one. But I got to work, not so much with Chuck, but I'm in the set, you know, every 3 or 4 months they would call me up to come back into the recording booth to do voiceovers for Milo. And I'm working with Mel Blanc, I'm working with Dawes Butler, I'm working with June Foray, Hans Conried, all the biggies came out to do this movie for Chuck. So I had the best of the best, and I had a 2-year run really dealing with like the A-listers in Hollywood of the animated world and the voiceover world. So that was one of my favorites. And then another favorite,
all the great ones.
I was lucky enough to do the Monkees Christmas episode. And I missed meeting the Beatles when they came to Universal Studios. I can't remember whether I was off that day or what was going on, but I came the next day and everybody was talking about, oh, the Beatles were here. And I didn't even get an autographed picture. Nobody even thought of that. I was like, but the Monkees, about 2 years later, were as big as the Beatles were to me in the States with their TV show. And I went on an interview and I got the part of Melvin Vandersnoot for the Christmas episode. And that was one of my favorite weeks in life, was hanging around with the Monkees and being an equal in the show, because in all the scenes I was in every scene with them, because they were supposed to babysit me, even though I was not a baby. I was a 14-year-old, sort of a computer nerdy, very adult-like. So in the, you know, when you look at Lidsville, you look at the Phantom Tollbooth and the Monkees, and I did about 27 episodes of My 3 Sons. I had some very good credits mixed in with a lot of just, you know, regular stuff. Yes, sir, the Hawaiian shirt.
How did Lidsville come about?
Lidsville came about from the persistence of Marty Krofft.
What's Lidsville?
I basically, you know, as I said, a couple of the shows that I got were really good. Well, there's a couple of shows I didn't get. One, back in 1969, 1970, I'm living in the beach, I'm surfing, I'm walking down here, as did anybody, you know, rock musicians. It was a hair society back then. Well, this unknown director came up to me and said, would you like to do a movie for me, and you gotta cut your hair. Before he got any further, I said, no, I'm not cutting my hair, Mr. George Lucas. So that movie came on to be American Graffiti. And my part was Richard Dreyfuss's part. You know, the starring of the, and the movie came out 2 years later, I went, oh my God, what a mistake, what a mistake. But at the same time,
what'd you say?
Lidsville, I had long hair, Sid Marty Krofft called me up. They wanted to do a Saturday morning series. I go out, I meet him.
I don't know what that is.
And it's silly. It's like childlike stuff. And it's like my movie career had taken a stall out because this movie we did never was released. That was supposed to get released to put me into the, you know, the movie star status. So I was kind of bummed about that. And the combination of the movie not making it to the screen because of a personal issue with the producer and his star wife, and then Saturday morning TV being the option, I was against it. But yeah, anybody know who the Cowsills are? The rock band called Cowsills, the original Partridge Family. Well, anyway, I was going to school with them, and I told them that I had this series that I don't want to do, and they pretty much talked me into doing it. They go, what, you're going to turn down work? So Sid Marty Krofft, I cut my hair a little bit for this part, but the main reason I did Lidsville was because I thought I might meet Caroline Ellis, who was in the Bugaloos, because I saw a picture of her, and I go, wow, she's cute. And I go, you know, maybe if I hang around here doing this silly show, I'll run into her, which I never did. But it turned out to be a good decision. Lidsville was a fun show. Charles Nelson Riley, Billy Hayes, all the little people in the hats. I knew most of them from having stand-ins over the years. And it only took 11 weeks out of the summer of '71, so that's how that came about. They kind of wined and dined me and convinced me that I should do it.
The Bugaloos, wow, you really...
What was that?
I forgot about the Bugaloos. I completely forgot about the Bugaloos. That's really
The Bugaloos, yeah.
Bugaloos, oh
Caroline
man.
Ellis, she was a cutie.